Hi everyone, welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, 2019, and this is a very special interview we have with a returning friend of the GoldFish Report who I admire, a true steel magnolia, an absolutely wonderful woman, very talented healer, author, mentor, past life regression therapist, and also the wife of another favorite guest on the GoldFish Report, Dr. Scott Werner's wife, Vicki Werner. We're so happy for you to join us again today. Vicki, thank you so much for coming. Welcome back to the GoldFish Report.
Great. I'm super excited to be here. Got lots of fun stuff to discuss today.
Yeah, and so what Vicki's going to be bringing to us, the information that she's going to share with us today, this is going to really be about focusing on the physiology of stress, dealing with finding your true purpose in life. These are the most, I think she'll explain herself, but one of the most important questions people do ask when they come and do the past life regression therapy and other types of therapy, soul journey therapies that she does, is really what's our purpose? What's an individual soul purpose? She's going to be talking about our choices and about stages of transformations in our life when, as we were talking before we started recording, in the tarot deck, there's this tower that, seems to be like the forces of the universe forcing change upon us when we're not able to do that and make that change ourselves, and how to adapt and change to these kinds of circumstances in life. We are in Mercury retrograde, folks, so this is a good time for this interview because it is about revisiting things that have not been resolved, revisiting past issues, and resolving them. So next Mercury retrograde comes along, you have it done already, and it won't be as tough. So welcome again, and I can't wait to hear all about this. And theta brainwave state, healing, all these really interesting topics. So let's get into it, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Share with us.
Great. So I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory as to why this is my passion. And when I first met Scott, he was going through a tremendous amount of transition with himself. He was being, as he was being wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit because he was healing and he was causing a disruption in the paradigm of the medical community. And I came into that literally in the 11th hour. And when we married, we had 2 children right away during our 2nd pregnancy. I watched my husband be kidnapped in front of me, and that may sound like language that isn't associated with kidnapping that we associate normally, but he was just running his practice and serving and loving and dedicated to healing. And 6 U.S. Marshals came in and cuffed him and shackled him and took him out in the parking lot in front of a very busy time in the business complex. And as I was pregnant, and we lost nearly everything. And it was a very, very traumatic time. We had people who were supposedly helping us that emptied our bank accounts. They were really good about that, and they stole our vehicles and the license. I was within 3 days of losing our home. Vehicles were taken. Our business was shut down. People were, his patients who were still wanting care were really demanding something more. And there's no way to even describe that level of stress. Well, I spent many, many years after that. Thankfully, he was able to come home weeks before our baby was born. But I didn't shut down that stress response. In fact, I would often say, I don't know how to respond differently. And what was happening is I became sympathetic nervous system dominant. And so there's 2 states. There's the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is good for, necessary for rest and recovery and digestion and all of these things to rebuild the body, to rebuild the energy. Well, sympathetic dominance, the nervous system is as we know, is the fight or flight. And historically, we all hear the saber-toothed tiger story.
Sorry about that. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. Lost control for a minute. I wanted to screen share when you're ready. I'm sorry about that. A 1-minute video that explains this HPA axis, this fight or flight that you're talking about. It's 1 minute long, and whenever you are ready, just so that our viewers can really understand what you're talking about. That's interesting that you said that you were stuck. It's like the switch was broken, kind of thing, right? It's like you.
Right,
Interesting.
right. Well, there's a physiological response to that stress response. As I mentioned, historically, it's that saber-toothed tiger where we had to engage in either hide, fight, or flight. And so when we did that, we were hopefully were able to get away and we were able to recalibrate. Well, in nature, there, you know, if we were an animal, we say we were for instance, we were a deer grazing in the meadow, and a lion came up, and that mechanism of that deer is to get out of the way to survive. And so it will run and engage that mechanism, and if it survives, the beauty of that mechanism is that within 15 minutes that deer is grazing again. Well, humanity has adjusted so much into this stress mode that we can turn on stress just by our thoughts. And so we relive this thought process all of the time. What happened to me is I always wanted to stay safe. And so we think that every one of us have had times where we've had a stress response. And we think that what we need to do is we play out every possible scenario so that we can survive. Our brain is made to keep us alive. And so we're constantly playing out these mechanisms. Well, our body and our brain doesn't know the difference of whether it's real or imagined. And so we're going to have the same physiological response. We're going to have the same chemical response. We're going to turn on that sympathetic nervous system. And so what that means, when we turn on the sympathetic nervous system, we'll see a potential threat. Our neocortex will send a signal to the limbic brain. The limbic brain will send a message via the vagus nervous system down to the adrenals to cause it to release adrenaline. So the purpose of that is we want to use the most quick releasing energy source that we have. And so our senses become very acute. Our pupils will dilate. That's why when we hear those experiences, like as a crash, or we get a diagnosis, or we have these challenge that arises, everything starts to stand still for just a moment, because we're very acutely aware of all of the potential threats. Well, our saliva will stop producing, because it's not a time to eat. It's not a time to digest. It's time to get out of the way. Our heart starts to palpitate. Our blood pressure rises. We are chronically in a high blood pressure, high adrenaline mode. So what happens further is that our body is brilliantly made so that it will shunt digestion. That means everything is flushed out of the body so that it doesn't take valuable resources, and that energy is removed and sent, the blood supply is sent to our limbs and to our conscious mind to get out of the way and to run.
Right, to the muscles. So if you have to
Correct.
flight or flee, you can, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it shunts our thinking, because we're in fear. And then humanity as a whole is making a lot of decisions based on fear, and not in a conscious decision. So that means we're under stress. Well, for me, years of that started to break down the body. And as you are aware, and what I wrote about in my book, is I died. I had a near-death experience in 2012. Now, I remember being in high school, and they were talking about stress and how stress kills and stress breaks down the body. I admit, I was like, what? Like, how does stress cause that kind of duress? How do we have that kind of response just because of stress? I really didn't get it. But now science is aware, and we know that stress down regulates our gene production. and it opens us up for disease. It causes us to be in an inflammatory state. So there's three kinds of stress in our body. There's physical, emotional, and chemical. Physical would be accidents, injury, trauma. Emotional, which is a very, very big one, is going to be betrayal, loss, tragedy, fears that are the unknown, future and the emotional challenges of our past, and then chemical, which is obviously virus, fungus, bacteria. So any kind of stress response is going to be a sign that your body is out of balance. That's what it's trying to do, and a stress response is trying to cause us to come back into balance. Unfortunately, in today's world, we live in an epidemic of stress. And there is research to say that our teenagers, because of their iPhones, they are in the stress response over 6 hours a day. That's because they're watching movies that are causing that stress response. They're engaged in social media that's engaging that stress response. They're in the state of FOMO, being left out of it, other people's experiences. That's causing a stress response. And every iPhone user knows that by the click of a incoming text, no matter what time of day, is going to activate. And we are responding. And so they say, I mean, research indicates that there is over 50 to 100 responses of stress every single day. Well, our bodies aren't made for that. And we become cortisol junkies. Now, cortisol is after an enormous amount of, like a long-term state of stress, we go into a cortisol response. And, you know, we can recognize a cortisol response because that's when we start to build up an extra layer in our midsection. Now, cortisol has a great effect for the medical community. So if there is a doctor that's going to do a transplant an organ transplant, they will inject cortisol into the recipient to lower the immune system to cause them not to reject the organ. Now, this is super great if you're going to get an organ transplant. We want that kind of technology.
Sure.
But we live in it every single day, all day long. And so in this stress response, we are reacting to our environment. We're constantly in a reactive mode rather than a proactive mode. Now, there is a saying, I didn't come up with a saying, but I really, really appreciate it, that we are in a cause and effect mode. That whatever our external environment is causing, we will have an effect by our internal nature. We'll have thoughts and emotions that will be what we think is the cause, you know, the cause of our pain, the cause of our stress, or because of an external environment. That's an old model, because the new model and the new understanding and the greater awareness and awakening is that we are creators. And as creators, we take that little D off of the and we go into cause and effect, which means we decide via our thoughts and our emotions how we are going to interact with the world. And there's been, you know, since The Secret and Law of Attraction and all of this new age information, people are aware of the fact that we're vibrational beings, we're frequency beings, and our brains and our hearts are sending frequency all of the time, and we're receiving frequency or vibration all of the time. And we can relate to that when we go into, all of us have had a time where we've entered a room and we entered that room and you're like, something feels heavy in here. Even though nobody's saying anything, we know that there is a disharmony, right? We can feel the energy. We can feel that energy.
Well, so, let me screen share this as you're talking about this. I don't know because I want people to get an idea of what you're talking about when it comes to this. Hold on a second. Yeah, I just want to get through the commercial first. Let me screen share this. HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal. So that causes a lot of adrenal
fatigue.
Fatigue, absolutely. And certainly I've suffered from that myself. I mean, it's really, you know, like you said, the cortisol response, putting that extra, it's horrible. I mean, some people get like tumors and all kinds of things. Let's just hear
Yeah.
what this is a neuroscience HPA axis. Let's just hear what it has to say, and then you can go from here.
Great.
Wait, let me turn this up.
I'll discuss the HPA axis.
It's only a minute. Is it a
The
minute?
hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA, axis is best known for its role in our body's reaction to stress. The HPA axis includes a group of hormone-secreting glands from the nervous and endocrine systems, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands. The hypothalamus is a small neuroendocrine structure situated just above the brainstem that controls the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, a hormone-secreting gland that sits just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland can release hormones into the bloodstream to reach a variety of targets. In the case of the HPA axis, hormones released from the pituitary gland travel down to the kidneys and influence the secretion of hormones from endocrine glands called the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. The primary function of the HPA axis is to regulate the stress response. When we experience something stressful, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. CRH signals the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into the bloodstream. ACTH travels down to the adrenal glands, where it prompts the release of a hormone called cortisol from the cortex, or outer layer of the adrenal glands. The release of cortisol causes a number of changes that help the body to deal with stress. For example, it helps to mobilize energy like glucose, so the body has enough energy to cope with a prolonged stressor. When cortisol levels in the blood get high, this is sensed by receptors in areas of the brain like the hypothalamus and hippocampus, which leads to the shutting off of the stress response through what is known as a negative feedback mechanism.
Yeah, so that's basically what I wanted to share, because you're talking about this negative feedback mechanism when it shuts down, and that's when I think havoc begins.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
like to have visuals, because when we're talking about the
Yeah.
brain and stuff, it's good to have some visuals. So you can continue.
Oh, for sure. So there's two energy sources that our body has, fat and glucose, when he's talking about that.
Right.
Well, under stress, we're not going to be burning that fat. It's a slow burn. We want the fast burn. And so we end up burning our sugars and storing our fat. And then that cortisol releases, we end up putting on that weight. And then, you know, the natural inclination, the first thought is, well, I need to go on a diet, which puts the body under more stress. And, you know, it just causes a cascade of problems. For me, I would shake violently. And so when I had my near-death experience, I went through about 8 months of trying to recover. Now, my nervous system shook constantly, so violently that I would lay on the bed, and Scott would literally have our young children lay on my legs to keep me from falling off the bed. I would violently spasms and shaking, and I couldn't digest anything because my body was constantly flushing it out. And so anything that I did eat left my body the exact same. And I became, you know, I started developing food allergies, was reactive to over 400 foods. And I was really, really sick and very weak, and my system was in complete breakdown. Now, the World Health Organization states that stress is a health epidemic of the 21st century. And I think that any person who is watching this and listening to this is going to agree. They're overstressed. Our children are overscheduled, and we constantly have this running mechanism of urgency. And every time, now, how many of us are sitting down watching a movie and then our phone beeps? Or how many times are we laying down to bed? And, you know, for me, even last night, my children were out later than me, so I was laying down after a meditation, and I had to keep getting up because my phone was beeping just in case, you know, just in case one of my children needed me or something. But we all respond to that. And then we wake up in the morning to an alarm usually, and if not, the first thing that we do is we open up our phone, we start looking at social media, we start turning on the news, We start updating of what's happened in the world for that informed information. But now we're not only stressed about our personal life, we're stressed about everything that's going on in the world around us. And so that stress response is going to cause, you know, then we're going to be reacting to our mother-in-law, and we're going to be reacting to the barking dog, and then we're going to be reacting to the incoming texts and the emails that are flooding our inbox, and we're going to be having this stress response on the freeways, and it's constant bombardment of stress that's happening to us. Now, nobody consciously says to themselves, I'm going to do whatever I can to get sick. Nobody consciously says that. And yet that's what we're doing every single day by breaking down our bodies. And 90% of the illnesses today are lifestyle and stress. And it's a known fact, like I said, that stress is going to downregulate the gene expression. There's less than 10% of cancers and health issues that are a gene, you know, that they were born with a genetic issue. That, but 90% of what we have today is because of stress.
You know, it's interesting what you said, because sometimes, you know, stress can cause people to lose weight, but if it's over a long period of time, like a really long period of time, many years, that's when you know, it depends on everyone's physiology, right? But I mean, you can't keep losing weight forever. So eventually, you know, I don't know what happens, but if the stress doesn't resolve itself or something, then that weight comes on, like you said, and that's not weight that is easily removable. I mean, that's very difficult to lose. It's a very unnatural, yeah. And
yeah, well, when I was
what
sick,
do you have to do to get that? When you said fast burn versus slow burn, what is it? Is it the adrenals? What is it that we have to do to kind of reverse that effect and start?
Well, we need to turn off the stress response. And in order to turn off the stress response, we need to, well, I'm going to tell you a few of the things that I suggest, and I go into a lot more depth in my book about this, but what we need to do is turn on the parasympathetic stress response, parasympathetic response, and turn off the sympathetic. The first one is sleep. In sleep, our bodies are going into re-regulation, balancing. It's all about balancing, and our brains will start burning off that excess energy. Now, the thing about the sleep, though, is our bodies, now people are going to say in this high performance mode, no, I survive on 5 hours, I do great, 6 hours, no, I thrive. No, you don't. You get by. But you can't say that you're thriving and drinking coffee and energy drinks all day, because it's going to be causing the stress response again. Yeah.
Got my espresso here, you know it. No, true. It's true. No, I mean, for some people, it's like sometimes I feel like the caffeine doesn't even have any effect on me anymore, you know, because it used to help, and you find you're drinking more and more and more of it. Now, I don't drink coffee, I drink espresso, but you know, I hear people up to like 10 cups of coffee a day, and it's like, why? You know, don't you realize it's not helping anymore? Like something's wrong with their output, your energetic output. I don't know how people can drink 10 cups of coffee. I don't know. If you're at that point, you need to take a serious look.
Yeah. You're just taxing your adrenals longer. And I remember thinking many times, when you see outside of your window and you see other people whose lives look normal when yours doesn't feel very normal and you don't feel very healthy. Truth is, nobody gets a free pass. Our bodies will eventually, something's going to catch up. So my recommendation is 7 to 9 hours of sleep, deep sleep a day, a night. So, and the next one is breathing. So when we're breathing under stress, it tends to be, you know, in the upper part, it's a quick breath, you know, it's like hyper breathing, but we're not getting the deep diaphragmatic breathing. So taking a nice slow inhale and then extending the exhale. When you extend the exhale, you're sending a message to your body, well, you know, you're not going to be breathing slowly if you're running. So you're saying, it's okay to calm down. It's okay to be in a more relaxed state. So, you know, one of the practices about breath is, you know, counting to a count of 5 is an inhale, and go deep in the diaphragm. And one way you can enhance that is draw attention by placing your, the palm of your hand over your abdomen, and that will draw your attention and your awareness down to your abdomen, and extend the belly. Put your attention to extend the diaphragm, and then slowly, then hold for a second, and then slowly exhale, and then hold, and 5-second inhale, hold, 6 or 7 second, you want to extend the exhale, and then hold. And then that breathing is going to calm the system down. Another one that I really love, now there's so much science about this, and I am a huge advocate of essential oils. Essential oils, we could go into a whole topic on the benefit of that. So my favorites are lavender, copaiba, frankincense, geranium, wild orange. Each of those are a calming effect. Now, with essential oils, a few things that I want to say about that. Please don't go and buy a fragrance and think that you're getting benefit, because they're going to be knockoffs of anything quality. You want therapeutic grade, and the grade that I use, I prefer, and I am an advocate for that company, because they're so responsible with. Now we could go into a whole other topic, but can I say the topic, the kind of oil, or no?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I use doTERRA. doTERRA is brilliant with their resources that wherever they do harvesting, they're always educating their growers. And so when they go to Nepal or Somalia or any of these other areas that are quite challenging, they don't have necessarily resources, so they open medical clinics, they open education for girls. A lot of girls, when they're menstruating, they aren't allowed to go to school, and so they offer sanitary education for that. And so they're very therapeutic grade, and they're tested, and so they're the highest quality as far as I'm concerned, and their mission. And so I'm an advocate for that company. But anything with the therapeutic grade, almost all oils can be taken internally, but at the very least, a couple of drops on the palm of your hand, rub it together, and then take a nice deep inhale by cupping over your nose and your mouth. And as we know, essential oils will go through the blood-brain barrier, and it sends a calming response. So anyway, essential oils are something that I'm a huge advocate for. Another one is yoga. Yoga moves your energy, and you can stand still and be still, and yet give that burn off of that excess energy. So yoga is really helpful, and it's strengthening, and it helps release. And then tapping is also known as EFT, emotional freedom technique. Tapping uses the meridians of the body that Chinese acupuncture uses, and all of this signals the calming of the system. Now, tapping can be used for stress response, PTSD, any kind of fears, any kind of emotional issues, physical issues. And I want to mention that with tapping, I have a free tapping download script that is on my website that your listeners can download. So I'm sure you'll post about my website, but tapping is really beneficial to calm the amygdala, calm the system down. And then my favorite #1 stress response release, to release that sympathetic nervous system, is meditation. Meditation, the meaning of meditation is to become familiar with. And so it's all about awareness and awakening, but it calms the system and moves you into a higher state of consciousness and releases emotions. And if somebody goes into meditation, initially, they may have that thought that it's another task to accomplish, that it's, and how many of us have started our meditation and we sit there and we, sit in the yogic posture, put our hands out, and we say Om, and and then you're like, well, that was 5 minutes. I'm never going to get back. But, you know, there's some beautiful practices, and I am a huge advocate for the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. So any of his meditations, the science that he marries with mysticism is so brilliant. And so I highly, highly suggest his work as far as, you know, meditation and awareness.
You know, just the thought of meditation probably stresses some people out, which you know. So, you know, because a lot of people feel like, you know, okay, so we're talking about reducing the stress anxiety response. And in the very beginning, if I could just go back for a minute, you're talking about this physiological response to stress, and a prolonged, where you're always in this fight or flight mode, which I guess some people would call that PTSD though. I mean, maybe some people really have PTSD and don't realize it, because that's something a little bit that puts us in a different category. And you can have that from traumatic experiences, you know, any kind of, not just, you know, military people. I mean, a lot of people can have it if they've been traumatized, really, basically, in any way. I mean, we're talking beyond stress. We're talking, at what point, you know, we're talking about a traumatic response. That's kind of like at a very high level. You know, it's one thing, you know, to be in an accident or something and having this immediate stress and response, and then, you know, you can heal and things like that. But there's something different about this prolonged stress that you're talking about that seems to be extremely destructive to people, that you're talking about. And this cortisol, like you're saying, it's kind of like, at what point, you know, how does PTSD play into this? And what do you recommend for that?
Well, first of all, let's remember that it took a long time for our military to recognize that our veterans were struggling with PTSD, and it was they did not get support for a very long time, and there was very limited resources made available to these amazing veterans who went and put their life on the line for our country. And PTSD can show up in a diagnosis. Now, if, say for instance, somebody's at a medical they're off at the doctor, they're usually there because there's something that they innately know that something's not right, and they are there. Now, in that state, you're in a receptive state. You're listening, you're wanting information, you're wanting guidance and a deeper understanding. So you're entered into that receptive state. PTSD is so underrated about how powerful that is and how many of us are deeply affected. Now, I had blood workup done probably like 4 months ago, and it still showed high levels of cortisol and high levels of PTSD in my blood result. Now, this was years and years of stress that is built on, and I've been actively engaged in changing that response. And it's not something that happens overnight. But as far as PTSD, I think working with someone who is clinically trained to understand what those symptoms are, and using support tools. Now, in my book, I talk about all of the potentials for healing. I wrote that book with the intention of someone who is laying in bed with young children possibly, or not able to go to work, or not able to function, and still looking for answers, going to doctor after doctor, looking for answers, and there aren't any. And, you know, then they start labeling you with autoimmune. They start labeling you with these conditions that only cause more stress. And I want to say something about autoimmune that I feel like really needs to be addressed. First of all, like I said, when we're under stress response, we're in a breakdown mode. We're in an inflammatory mode. We're in disease mode. When we're in the opposite state of that, which we'll go into, is the creation mode, the build and recovery mode. So let's just call a spade and recognize that a huge percentage of our population is in a high level of stress and a high level of physical breakdown. Now, illness happens over time, most of us. That means, you know, we'll start having where we start to feel a little bit joint pain, We're not sleeping as well because, you know, our melatonin level is off because we got to stay alert. We're not, you know, our digestion is off. What we used to eat didn't really sit with us as well, or our minds are going a little bit chaotic. We go into potential depression and anxiety. Now, as a note, depression and anxiety on a functional brain scan is exactly the same. And, you know, they'll say depression is, you know, unresolved emotions of the past. Anxiety is fear of the unknown future. But in this health response that we start to, or the lack of health response, we start playing small, we go to bed, you know, we don't do the activities that we used to, we don't feel as physically active, we have fatigue, you know, our bodies are tired, we don't recover as quickly because so much of our valuable resources is in this you know, fight or flight mode. It's all trying the external environment. And so we put too much of attention on that. So in this breakdown of the body, as far as the labels of autoimmune, now there's over 80 signals of what labels. There's over 80 labels of autoimmune now today in the medical industry, and they're building all the time, these new labels, because autoimmune is, we don't know what it is. It's gonna have symptoms that are gonna be similar to like flu-like symptoms, adrenal fatigue, fibromyalgia, all of those things that are categorized in that. And they don't know, but you're coming up with more and more symptoms all the time, so they have to put another label. The unfortunate thing is autoimmune in the medical world says your body is attacking you. Your body's under stress and it's attacking you. And I think that is the worst travesty that we can offer the humanity at this time, to say that our own body is under attack, that we're attacking, our own body's attacking us, because the only advocate that you may feel like you have is your own body. And if you're going to come from the consciousness that your body is attacking you, then you're swimming upstream for the rest of your life. And there is a possibility to heal. And our bodies are conditioned and created to self-regulate and to heal under the right circumstances with the right information and the right environment. And
right.
we offer those conditions, we can heal.
Right, exactly. I mean, our body is supposed to be able to heal from, we have all these really sophisticated mechanisms and systems in our body in order to do this. These autoimmune issues, though, are very interesting. You know, a lot of it is caused by outside poisons and toxins and things like that. Things like endometriosis, though, for people who don't know what that is, it's a very difficult thing to even diagnose. You have to have a laparoscopy. For women, you have to have a laparoscopy to actually diagnose that. But what's interesting is that that's, your body's not recognizing it as foreign when these cells that are supposed to only be in the uterus, the lining of the uterus, end up in the abdominal cavity, and they implant in whatever, and this is just one example, but it's a complex example because it's not supposed to be there. And it's a very, very, uncomfortable, very painful. It can even implant in the lungs, and they're still under hormone control. So people who, are still menstruating will have the, it can cause scarring, it can cause lesions, all kinds of things. And it's just really wild to think that our body, something's gone wrong in the body where it doesn't recognize that that's a foreign cell, it's a foreign entity in the cavity, in the abdominal cavity, although it's not that it's a foreign substance to the body. And that might be why, they call it an autoimmune problem, but because the body's not recognizing it as a foreign, because it isn't really foreign. It belongs in the body, but it doesn't belong in the abdominal cavity. So it's kind of strange. A lot of, Italy almost banned tampons completely because of, they were thinking, because it was like retrograde menstruation where the blood in the uterus goes out through the fallopian tubes. And no one really understands, what causes it, I don't think. But in any event, it's strange because how could the body attack something that's supposed to be in the body? But you know, they're specialized cells that are just supposed to function. So what causes this to go awry? It's we still should have cells that should recognize it doesn't belong in that part of the body. But you know, I know you're not a medical doctor, I'm not a medical doctor, but it just from a physiology perspective, it's interesting. Is it stress that, you know, to what extent? Now, that's only one example. There's a lot of autoimmune diseases, a lot of autoimmune problems where the body's not recognizing something as being foreign, or it is recognizing something to be foreign that isn't, and it attacks it. So, you know, look, we have chemtrails, we have GMO food. All of this is affecting our physiology and interacting with our body and physiology in just a normal course of life. And then, you know, the fluoride, the vaccinations. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the thing. So I mean, what a disaster. I mean, it just seems like a recipe for disaster. But in terms of all of these kinds of problems, I mean, how much of it is attributed to stress, like these autoimmune problems, do you think? Or just, I don't know, maybe
Well,
Scott has talked about that.
one of the most common, so there's a couple of things in this conversation that we'll break up. First of all is the lining of our gut is our first defense from invaders. 75% of our immune cells are along the lining of our gut. It's a very thin line. And, you know, leaky gut is something we're all familiar with now, and it's why gluten, I mean, I still have horrible reaction to gluten. I get violently ill. But what happens is you know, these foreign and our immune system starts to break down, and we start getting little tears in the digestive system, which means proteins get in the blood supply, and it's you know, it's not supposed to be there. So what you're saying, you know, it's not supposed to be there, so it causes our immune system to go on attack all the time. Now, as far as, you know, when you're talking about endometriosis and all of these different levels of illness and where it shows up in the body, there's a few things. One is our thoughts are the language of the mind, and our emotions are the language of the body. And emotions that get stuck somewhere in the body, there's different levels of emotions, and there's different emotions that are going to get stuck in different energy centers or chakras. And so fear is a very base chakra, very base emotion that we have an epidemic of. And fear is going to hit the reproductive system, the bladder, the kidneys. And that's why, you know, say young children, like my first marriage, my ex-husband, his punishment was always to like shove the kids in the corner. And my precious oldest daughter, you know, as a young toddler, she would always wet herself. And that's a very common response, is because the kidney, she was in fear. And there's different emotions that are going to hit different. Grief is going to hit the heart and the lungs. And, you know, worry, anxiety, guilt, shame, all of these different emotions are going to hit different energy centers. And that tends to be the energy center that's going to be a little bit more prone to, when there's a weakness or an invader, it's going to settle into one of our more vulnerable areas, of course. Now, so I feel like that the most important thing we can do is have an awareness of our emotions. Our thoughts and our emotions are the center of creation. And we are beings who came to create. That's why we were given free agency or free will, free choice, because if we step out of the dynamics of the human condition and we look at the bigger picture, why are we here? We're here to create, to experience, to learn, to share, to support, to love. And we do that via the relationships and our environment. And we all have had struggle. If you came to this planet and, you know, consciously we're going to say, oh, I don't want any struggle. Please just let me have a very gentle, nurturing, loving environment. There's never going to be a resistance to cause us to go within. Now, when I was so ill And here I was married to a very brilliant healer who would speak at all of these different events. And so we were friends with very brilliant healers. And he literally took me to places around the world trying to heal me. I went to healers everywhere. I did silent remote healings. I did energy healings. I did Reiki treatments. I did all kinds of healings. But I kept looking outside of myself for the healing. But if you are in any chronic condition, you have to come to a point where you are willing to make a change. And that change is going to have to be via your decisions that you're making, your lifestyle, the food that you eat, and the way that you live on a daily basis. And sometimes you got to get rid of relationships that are challenging. I mean, Scott talks all the time about Dr. Hulda Clark and all of, the cure for all cancers. And almost always is get rid of your relationships. Now, I'm not advocating that, but I guarantee in the illness and struggle that my husband and I both have had, although we adore each other and our marriage is really strong and healthy, we took a hard look at that and said, is this causing me more disease? Is this causing more stress? And Scott knows I came in at the 11th hour of him being attacked, and I was not set up for that. I did not know how to experience that level of trauma, and it caused years and years of struggle. And we don't consciously say, sign me up for struggle. And so we, when we have these PTSD experiences, I know for a fact, and it's not something I'm trying to identify. I don't need to go to a support group because I don't need to revisit the emotion. I don't think that's healthy. But what we need to do is come from an understanding of its purpose, ask ourselves and go to our intuition and say, what is this here to teach me? What am I here to learn from this experience? And if the universe really is conspiring on my behalf, what is the message? And then we can transition out of the PTSD to post-traumatic growth, that we enter into this space that not one of us would consciously sign up for, and we would certainly not ask our worst enemy to experience. However, once we get to the other side of that, we wouldn't change it because of the transformation that was possible.
Well, I mean, we might be wishing that on Jeffrey Epstein pretty soon. But I'll tell you something, this is going to be a big shock to people when this comes out, what was happening. And I'm not trying to put, look, we're dealing with the topic of stress, and it's going to be stressful when people really learn the truth of what was happening and who was involved in this. I mean, that's, I've done my POTUS reports talking about, I think they're all going to jail. I mean, it's really sad to see how many politicians have been involved in the kind of corruption. And let me tell you something, there's no greater, trauma than childhood trauma. And what they have done to these children is really unthinkable. And not only, we're talking not only trafficking, sex trafficking, forced sex slavery. We're also talking about, there's mind control involved in some of it. We're talking about the NXIVM trial, which the mainstream media hasn't been covering, has talked about how these women were branded as sex slaves that belonged to Keith Rainier's group. This is all coming down. This is really the beginning of it. And people will be so shocked and horrified at what they learn about about these children, about what's on this Anthony Weiner laptop regarding what Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin, and all these other people were involved in doing. You're going to get so sick to your stomach. You're not even, I'm really glad you're talking about this stress topic today, because we are going to need some major healing, and stress is going to be part of it, because people are not ready to get their mind around this. I'm telling you, I have seen some of these documents. I have seen images that I can't even imagine a human being would be involved in. And, look at this trauma-based mind control that the MK Ultra, we talked about this in my POTUS report yesterday. It's unimaginable how they go and fracture the mind. They traumatize you and torture you as a child, and then fracture the mind. I mean, these people's lives, it was basically, they were hijacked, they were stolen from them, they were deprived, and they really struggle to function in life if they've survived. And it has to end. I mean, so Donald Trump is doing that. And I don't mean to talk politics here or anything, but what I'm trying to say is that humanity's ready for this great awakening. We're ready for the apocalypse, for the truth, to all that has been hidden to be revealed. And we're going to need this healing on a global scale. This is not, but we have to start on an individual level. And what you're doing is a good place to start. But the whole thing is, a lot of times we don't have control. This is the issue, right? I mean, we don't have control over the circumstances outside of us. We can only control how we respond to them. But we don't want to be inhuman. We don't want to turn it off. But what's the best way to go about dealing with these kinds of stresses, Vicki? Learning about this, because we can't turn it off. That's not healthy either, right?
No.
People can turn it off, right?
Right. So first of all, let's just recognize that these atrocities have happened throughout human history. And there have been some brilliant ascended masters that have talked about, there's been civilizations that have been wiped out because we came and we just went way off course as a state of humanity. Now we know politically and, the Hollywood scene and, all of these different areas, there is a horrible atrocities that our systems aren't made to recognize.
Yeah.
Now, as far as children are concerned, young children in their first 6 or 7 years they're in that theta, they're theta dominant, they're brain dominant, which means is they're receptive. So they come in, now let's come back into why again we're here. And I'm going, I ask the big questions and I want to know the bigger answers, the bigger, deeper questions. So I'm like, what is that experience? Well, young children, when they're born, they didn't come with a manual. They didn't, they went through that veil and they didn't get, okay, so these are the ways you're going to have life and these are the challenges you're going to, it's all closed off for them. So in order for that soul to come into that environment, they are going to be in that brainwave state that's everything is egocentric, that everything that's coming into them is training them and setting them up for their environment. And one thing that was very fascinating with that is science is showing that the gene expression begins when at the point when based upon the energy, the vibration of the parents, when this sperm and the egg come together. And the reason why that specific gene expression is going to start then is because the mechanics of that baby needs to be able to survive in the same environment that it was created in, that it's going to have some variances in the neocortex, or it's going to have some variances because it's a survival. We're here to survive. So in this theta brainwave state, that first 7 or 8 years, in this receptive state, we're very influenced by our environment. And, we see these beautiful young babies and they start giggling and we make them smile and they smile. Well, they're young toddlers and they say silly things and they do these experiences. Well, everything's all of the joy in the world from that egocentric mind is going to say, this is because of me. Unfortunately, it goes on the other side of the spectrum too. And so how many of us were young children, and if we see that our parents are going through a separation, and how many of those young children, the first thing they're going to say is, it's all my fault. And they because of egocentric, everything good is because of them. Everything bad is because of them. And so when they're picked on, or when there's some bullying, or when there's some pain in the family, or when there's disharmony between the parents, or when there's any of these traumas, and these atrocities are almost too much for my soul to bear. I really try to walk the line very carefully because I can't allow my nervous system to get that engaged. I have a friend, one of my very dear friends, her daughter was kidnapped and was in sex trafficking, and thank God they got her back. Thank God that it was a nightmare, and the recovery from that experience is so much worse than people realize. Getting children back is only the first step, but it is a long road ahead on rebuilding. They're going, children are picked up off the street, young children, like in Las Vegas, for instance, down in these prostitution rings, that, they'll have heroin, they'll just inject in the forehead, right? Go walk right past them and inject them, and then they have them. And you can't even come close to understanding the social influence that our children are getting every single day, and parents are unaware of it. And it, you know, then layer that with all of the depression that's going on. Suicide rates are astronomical. And my older children, I was always this very protective parent, that I was trying to protect my children from the evils outside the world. Well, that's one level of the evils outside the world. We always want to help them. But now we have to fear about what their brain is doing, and the level of depression, and the way the children are taking their lives. I mean, we have a war zone in our own family all of the time, because our children are under an enormous amount of stress. And every parent of young children has asked themselves that question. Not only do I have to keep my child alive and protected from the outside influence and all the bullying, but now I have to make sure that they don't take their own life.
It's very difficult. I mean, it's difficult as it is, just being a parent of teenagers, you know what I mean? And trying to just, you know, weather the normal teenage storms. But that peer pressure of today, and it's all social engineering, though.
Yeah.
You know, and so, yeah, absolutely. There's no greater trauma than, you know, to a parent, than the anguish of losing a child. Even, I don't mean only just death. I mean, we're talking about even trusting the people who we trusted, CPS services, things like that, who were, you know, have been caught involved in trafficking children and taking children. Senator Nancy Schaefer was trying to expose this. I don't want to get too much into that. You know what I want to do? But the thing is that people have to stop turning their head and looking the other way. But some of it has to do with expectation, though, right? I mean, that's the thing. They kept us in this illusion that, you know, everything was Disneyland we were living in, you know, and it wasn't. I mean, they were trying to hide all of the horrible things by controlling the media. And so we've come up with these expectations that are illusions. They're not real. So how much of stress, though, is related to our expectations, whether they're realistic or unrealistic expectations?
Well, each of us need to find a healthier balance on, you know, try to engage in listening and reading all of these things when there isn't anything that we can do at that moment about it. It's actually causing us more disharmony. The healthier response is, you know, Scott talks about Ho'oponopono, and there's so much beauty about that, is in order to make these changes in the outside world, the first thing that we need to do is change ourselves. We need to raise our frequency, raise our vibration to a higher level. Now, this may sound, you know, utopian, but there's a lot of research about the benefits of we raise the consciousness via our own, but that's how we contribute, is by our consciousness, our awareness, and our vibration. Now, there's different stages of transformation. I want to go over each one of these so that people understand, and we're constantly in this evolution of transformation. The first one is unconscious incompetence. This is the reactive stage, and when we hear these experiences, these atrocities, we go into that reactive, where we're reactive to our everyday environment. We become autopilot on our daily routine. We don't do anything, you know, 90% of what we do today, we did yesterday. And we're in a space where we don't know what we don't know. We're incompetent of what is bigger than us, and our decisions that we make are all based upon our emotional traumas of our past. And our emotions that are primarily our fear, sadness, blame, shame, guilt, all of those emotions are in that state of the unconscious incompetence. Now, we all have that level on some area. I mean, we can be that way from political. Now, I say, you know, I have a lot of, you know, as a young mother, there was a lot of unconscious incompetence, and then I began to learn and all of these different things, and then there's different levels and different layers to that. The next level is going to be conscious incompetence, and this is your reality check. Now, I will say the second level is the most painful, because now you are aware of what needs to change, but you don't necessarily know how to make that change. The habits, the behaviors, and the patterns that you have, you recognize aren't working for you anymore, but you don't necessarily know how to take the steps forward. So this is why it's the most challenging. You have a desire for something more. You're willing to make the change, though. And so the emotions of embarrassment and shame are those primary emotions. We feel shame and embarrassment that we're not better. Now, with my mentoring clients, I see this all the time. nobody wants to be incompetent. Nobody wants to, you know, we all want to achieve and set a goal for something better, but we feel shame and embarrassment when we haven't accomplished what we're already setting ourselves up. So the next level is conscious competence, and this is where you take responsibility and you have awareness of what needs to change. You have an active engagement in the activities that support this new change, and you become something different. You start leaning into the new decision making, and you're dedicated to self-improvement. And then the fourth level is going to be conscious competence. This is your reward center. This is new behaviors have replaced the old habits and behaviors. You have mastery over the skills and behavior, and you have an improved outlook, and you're inspired to help others and improving in their lifestyle, and you are in engagement in pursuing goals and activities that are become more effortless. Now, those are the 4 levels that are most commonly recognized. People can go online and read about each one of these in more in depth, but there's another level that I think all of us need to be aware of, and this is also with the ascension process. This is the stuff that, you know, this is where what the information that I share and the information that Scott shares marries one another, because this is conscious competence of unconscious incompetence. This is when you become the role model. You teach and inspire others by the behavior that you have. You raise your frequency and your awareness to a higher state. You enter a space of allowance, knowing that there's a higher order that's taking place, and you continue to grow and learn, and you become an influencer with a higher set of awareness. And that's the space that I'm going to highly recommend that each one of us enter. We each have gone now, what we're talking about, like sex trafficking, that, I mean, literally it makes you bilious. It's just, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. But understanding that how we can contribute to the world in those things, there's going to be it's fundamental that we choose to be actively engaged in our own wellness. We choose to be actively engaged in where our thoughts and our emotions and what our vibration is, and we can influence that way.
Now, that's excellent advice, because, you know, we have to have some self-control over this. You know, we can't always, we have to, especially people who are healers, you know, you have to protect your energy. You have to protect, you have to have boundaries. You just have to have boundaries. And even if you're not a healer, you have to have boundaries.
Right.
And all of,
yep.
Right. So healthy boundaries, meaning, you know, you have to love yourself first, and not in a selfish, you know, conceited way. But, you know, in that you have to fill your cup of love first before you can offer it to someone else, really. Because, you know, it's like, you know, the man who offers, the naked man that offers you his shirt off his back. I don't know, whatever that saying, however that saying goes, you know what it is, Vicki.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you, if you're empty yourself, you really don't have much to offer and to give and help other people. So it's kind of like, you know, because what's really causing the stress is all these conflicting thoughts, ideas, emotions, feelings. And so the thing to do is to, you know, one way, of course, I always have the serenity prayer, always handy right here next to me. You know what you can change, accept the things you cannot, and you know, have the courage and the wisdom to know the difference. Because, you know, that's the thing, is that you have to have realistic expectations, and really only through learning hard knocks, you know, way in life can you sometimes have that discernment as to know, you know, as to having that wisdom, gaining that wisdom. Because a lot of the stress can be self-imposed. A lot of it's just mental stress where you're stuck in something, but you're refusing to see something, you know, because maybe you don't want to. So a lot of this has to do with really realistic expectations. Do you know what I mean? What's really realistic? It's like a lot of people get into relationships and really are not realistic about their relationship, about you know, what to expect from the relationship, because maybe they don't even communicate their own needs, or they don't know themselves, you know, what they need. But, you know, so there's a lot of things we can do. What you're saying is, through this transformation, levels of transformation, there's things we can do, that we do have control over in our life, because there's things we do not. Serenity prayer, you know, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, the courage to change the things that I can. And you really have to, you know, you can pray for courage, meditate on that. But this is great advice, because you know, the meditation is great, and you have to be honest with yourself. right?
Yeah. Yep. So we've talked a lot about stress and how, and so, you know, every one of us can, you know, every single person who's going to watch this and go, okay, busted. Busted. So now let's move into creation. That's what we're really here to do. And in order to do that, we need to understand that there's two laws of the mind. There's two levels of that. One is association and the other is repetition. Now let me explain what that means. When we learn new information, any information that isn't familiar to us, that comes in through us, we associate through information from our history. And as an example, let me give you an example of what that means. So, like for instance, if I were pregnant, new, and I'm using these examples that, you know, they're years ago, but you know, most of us have had children. And so you're in this parenting class, and eventually that question, especially when you're entering that third trimester, you're entering the questions that are like, what is that going to feel like to give birth to a child? And, you know, we all got that, but we've never had an association. None of us have given birth before. And so what happens is then they'll go through an association. And so two examples of that association, I remember Carol Burnett said, it's much like taking your lower lip and pulling it over your head. Now, each of us have a lower lip and we can associate right away, like, okay, that's a lot of stretching and that does not sound comfortable. Another way that association that someone could do the reference is, it's like using the restroom and pushing out a watermelon. Now, we're familiar, okay, that's pretty big and that's not gonna go very easily.
That's childbirth.
Yeah, that's childbirth. So we have association, right? That's our level of association. Any incoming information is going to be based upon our past.
Sure.
The next level is repetition. So we create a synaptic connections in the brain, and where the unfamiliar becomes familiar. Now, association is how you learn, and then repetition is how you remember. Now, we've all experienced a time where we are taking, and hopefully people are taking notes today, and, you know, taking notes from this and actively engaged in the experience.
Sorry,
So
after they take a Xanax, because we talked about stress so much, we might have stressed them out a little. I'm sorry.
We also gave them support tools.
There you go.
But, you know, how many of us have attended a lecture or we've read a book where we learned some new information, and it sounds super exciting, and you go to, you know, say for instance, we went to a Tony Robbins thing and he gets all hyped up and we get motivated and you're like, I am going to remember this and I'm going to implement this right away. And it's because we build up new synaptic connections. However, if we do not repeat that connection and teach it and learn it on a deeper level and go into the state of repetition, those are going to start drifting back apart, right, and within hours or days. And so we need to recognize that in order to make an active change in our life, there's three things that need to happen. We need to have a clear intention with our thoughts. We need to have very, very clear intention of what it is we desire. We need to have an elevated emotion and feel, and if you don't know what that elevated emotion is, go into gratitude, because gratitude means accomplishment. You've received it and you've received it with love. But any kind of elevated emotion that's going to raise your frequency to a higher level of consciousness, and it's going to give us the vibrational frequency of what's out there. Now, there's science that says every possibility in the quantum field is within reach. It's when are we going to reach out and touch the right one? And then the third one is going to be sustainable application. If we're not sustaining our thoughts and our emotions, they're going to drift back into our history and we're going to get caught up in our stress level again. And so those are the three most important things to have awareness. And so I have information to transformation. I have some notes here that I'd love to share that are tips to help people to get to a new level of understanding. You know, with my mentoring clients, that I want, not that I think everybody needs to achieve and go out and get this high level, be on a stage and speak and make all of these $zillion and all of that. Anything that's going to improve some aspect of your life is going to improve all aspects of your life. And so you need to ask yourself, what brings me joy? What have I always wanted to do and I've been limited by fear? I've let fear control me, or my perception of my limitations. and you ask if I could do anything, what would it be? And we all can access that answer. However, most of us don't, because we don't access choice. We live in this state of slumber where we are reactive to our past and we keep repeating these same patterns. And, you know, another way of saying that is we're asleep. We need to wake up and we need to make conscious decisions. Choice is the superhero power that each one of us were born with. And if we're not utilizing our greatest power, then we're letting our life slip away. And sometimes we get caught in this dynamic that there's some power above us that is manipulating and controlling our environment, and that we're subject to the evils of the world. But we've got to take back that conscious decision, and we need to move into the space where we cause an effect via our thoughts and our emotions. And so for my information with this is I have 10 states of information that I think people start taking notes. Like if you haven't been taking notes, take notes, because this is really valuable. And repeat the information. Use it, make it sustainable so that you can be actively engaged in decision making. The first one, disconnect from external world and place your attention on your internal world. That, you know, there's only so much we can do about the harms in the world. We can send love, we can ask for grace, we can ask for the masters and the angels and the higher realms to work on that. We can really support it that way, but we need to put our attention on our internal world by unplugging from social media and turn off the phone and the TV. Now, one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard in my life about the media and what's really going on in the world was said by Winston. And Winston said this to me when I could not believe that there was so much evils in the world when things were starting to come awaken to me. And this was
you mean about the court system?
Yeah. Yeah, but not just the court system, that, you know, the judicial system, the political system, education system, all of the media system, whatever system is out there. But he said, whatever you're seeing, whatever is being presented to you, flip it on its head, because that's where the truth lies. And so we have got to, now nobody wants to believe there's that many evils in the world, but it is. Just accept it for what is, but stop engaging in it on a negative manner by propitiating that harmful negative energy, and just recognize that you're not doing yourself any good by constantly engaging in the you know, the CNN and the news and all of that. There's not a whole lot you can do about what the war is going on, but you can start taking care of the war within and manage your thoughts and your emotions. Number 2 is spend time in nature. Ground yourself and awaken your senses through nature. We have intuition that we were all born with. We have this higher guidance. We have soul guides, and we have spirit guides, and we have members of our tribe that are on the other side that are supporting us. We did not get handed down into this earth realm with no support, but we have to connect to nature to reconnect to that kind of inner guidance. And so get out in nature as much as possible. Connect with the elements that are going to help calm your system. Number 3, center in the present moment. Breathe and then take your thoughts off of your past and move them towards your potential future. And know that you are more clear and more creative when you are living in present time. So number 4, choose to become a higher level of consciousness. This means you can make that choice. Where are you going to go, and where do you want your attention? Put less attention on what's behind you and more attention on what's in front of you, and get clarity about your future self, and then decide to live in it every single day. And so, you know, like in a meditation, don't get up from your meditation until you're in that elevated state. And whatever that being that you're going to be, whatever that life that you're trying to create, it will find you if you're living and being and acting as if.
So don't check your text messages when you hear them ding on your phone when you're in the middle of meditation.
Don't do it. Don't do it. It's like calming the animal within. It's our primitive state that wants to respond. And so, you know, turn them off. Make sure that the dings don't come in if you need that kind of protection. It's kind of like people who are texting and driving, which, why, seriously, throw that phone in the back so you can't get it, so you can be more present in the future and drive safely. So number 5, decide on an elevated emotion that you want to feel as this new identity. and live in this elevated motion. Now, we all have trauma. We all have grief. We all have reaction. I went to a yoga class the other day, and I placed my mat in front of somebody, but it was like 5 feet in front of her. So I thought I was like safe, and I was making room for other people. And then she comes in, and she and her friend, they're like whispering about me and pointing at me, how I was blocking her view from the mirror. And it was completely innocent on my point, but I got so reactive. I was like so annoyed by that experience. I'm like, I'm just here to meditate. I'm here to be in yoga. I'm just like, got myself reactive. We all have moments where we get reactive, but choose not to reside in it. Nobody's better by residing in it. So allow the emotions to come through. I don't ever encourage you not to feel emotions. It's just don't live in them. Don't stew in them. Don't live in the ones. Have a gate of what's allowed into your consciousness. So number 6, rehearse in your mind the details of the new state of being and live as if it's already arrived. Be a conscious creator of the life that you want to create, and add the elements of these different sensory things. Why we have senses. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? How does that bring in that elevated emotion? Who do you engage with? What kind of experience? Walk and be as that new being that you want to create for yourself. And number 7, let go of your past identity. Be conscious of your old emotions and that don't belong in your future. If you want a new identity, you need to create it by having those elevated emotions. We've all had the trauma. And if we are going to go to support group after support group and keep reminding ourselves of our trauma and reminding those of our wounds and our issues that we've had in our past, we're going to reside in there. And the way I give it as an example, we try to move forward, and then we think, oh wait, I got to go pick up that baggage of my 7-year-old self who was hit by my grandfather, or my 9-year-old self who was mistreated by my teacher, and all of these old identities that don't serve us anymore. So number 8, forgive yourself and others. Forgiveness is really, really, it gets rid of the bondage. And one of the ways that we can recognize forgiveness is when we're not holding that individual or that experience hostage in our thoughts. When we're no longer letting the wounds carry us, and then we're moving into wisdom. We understand there's purpose for all things. Now, there's been errors in judgment. I've made them, you've made them, we've all made them, and we've seen some horrific errors in judgment. But we allow ourselves to forgive and release the bondage. It frees us up to be a more of creative self. So number 9 is use the law of association. Spend time with the energy of what you want to create. If you want to be a great piano player, start taking piano classes and listen to piano. Watch the players. Watch how their fingers dance across the keys. Now there's YouTube videos of nearly everything that you could ever imagine. If you want to be an electrical engineer, watch electrical engineers. Watch a TEDx talk. Read about these. Because you are associating in the vibrational frequency. Now, another way that you could do this is, like, for instance, like I have letters that my grandmother wrote me when I was young, and I'm reading those letters. Her energy still resides in those letters and the words that she wrote, and I could feel her and I can hear her voice, although she passed almost 20 years ago. But that same thing goes, the vibration and the frequency of those who are writing these books. It's present in that space. So you go through that level of association and bring yourself into that newer vibration. And final repetition, repeat what you've learned until it becomes unconscious competence, where you become this new identity, this new self with a greater sense of awareness. Recognize you're going to stay in this evolution, that when, our purpose is not a singular, it's going to be lifelong. Be a student and then choose to be a teacher, and share the wisdom that you have with others, because there's a lot of people who need help right now.
Well, I'm sorry. Are you done with that?
Yeah.
That part? Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. But no, Scott says it all the time. It's like, do the Ho'oponopono, forgiveness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Part of that is, part of the stress reaction too is forgiveness. But then again, we're talking about creation. You're really talking about doing affirmations. This repetition that you're talking about is really an affirmation. You know what it is? It's reprogramming us, because we've learned some pretty dysfunctional, ideas, thoughts, beliefs, things we inherited, because, like you said, those first 7-8 years of life is so impressionable that you really inherited the knowledge you have. by your environment. It wasn't like you had free will choice because you're a child, an infant, right? So you inherit this, and some of it could be dysfunctional. Some of it could be based on prejudice. Some of it can be based on, you know, things that aren't real, you know? So it's kind of like, it's like you have to reprogram. We have to reprogram ourselves. We all have a certain programming we have to overcome. And a lot of it is just dealing with reality and expectations of things, and it's going to be, you know, a hard pill to swallow when all of this stuff does come to light, but it, you know, it has to come to light. And all we can do is, you know, pray for the souls of the people who, you know, have been affected. And if we're even talking about on an individual level, you know, we have to stop being so tough on ourselves, don't we? I mean, are we sometimes not our own worst enemy, where we expect so much more of ourselves, and of course, and in turn, we expect that from other people who might not really be able to give it. And, you know, we have to really take a good hard look at ourselves and, you know, what our real expectations are. Truth will set us all free, right?
Yep. And, you know, I am a big advocate. I write about it in my book, about my journey of awakening. And what I really wanted is just to find a reason to love myself. You know, I was a stay-at-home mom. I didn't feel like I had anything to offer the world. And I went through a lot of really self-critical moments. And, you know, I have a twin sister who's taller, more beautiful, more eloquent. She lived and traveled the world. She, you know, she was so admired by so many people, and I was a stay-at-home mom with young kids living in yoga pants and, you know, just trying to survive. And there was a lot of years of that where I just was very critical of myself, and I based my self-value based upon on my actions, and I felt like I could earn my right to be in other people's space if I worked harder and I did more, and I constantly was in this doing mode. But I have really come to recognize that through all of the illness and through all the challenges that I went through, I had so much compassion for my body. And I thought, there is a million times that I wanted to run away from my body. There's a million times I wanted to check out because the pain level was so intense. But I knew that my body had to keep riding this train. And it really, I would look at myself and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And just hug myself and just love myself and think, dang, I can't be that person that judges you anymore. I need to show up and I treat you like I would treat my children or virtually any other person on the planet. And that's how we all are, that our deeds and our actions are not the compass for our value. Our value is because we exist on this planet and we came here to experience and to thrive.
Well, let me also screen share your website so viewers can see where they can go to get more information about you and your work. And of course, I'm also going to screen share. Wait a second. It's not working. Just a second. We're going to get there. Yeah, hold on a second. I'm sorry, folks. I wish I had a better system for this.
Well, while you're doing that,
okay. This is your website. Yeah. You want to explain this? Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously we also have some of the GoldFish report, the other two reports that we did that are on here, and I'm going to be going through some changes. I'm in the process of creating some webinars, some trainings that go into deeper understanding of a lot of this information about really taking the realm, taking the helm of your healing experience. And I know that there are so many people that are really in a deep condition that's layered with fear and emotion. And I also believe that every one of us are healing on some level. Now, my book not only has a lot of information for people who are in the healing paradigm, whether it's emotional, mental, or physical, we're all healing something. But we cannot have thousands of people that are hundreds of thousands of people that are having some level of illness or weakness or fatigue or questions and not feeling very good without hundreds of thousands of families going, what do we do with this? And then it gets, you know, the chronic conditions and disease. And, you know, when Scott got sick 2 years ago, it's been really a horrific thing to watch him struggle. And he's fighting infection right now, and he's had a rough couple of days from an infection from oral surgery. And he gets attacked, and emotionally his body has been hit a lot. And so I know what it's like to wonder if your husband's going to wake up the next morning. I know what it's like to not want to plan things because you just don't know what's going to happen, and you just overcompensate. And I spend 100 times a day, are you okay, are you okay, are you okay, because I have to gauge whether he's okay to make sure I'm okay. And so the back section of my book is for the caregivers and the people that are in family members that are struggling. And I think I know I went through some horrific experience so that I can also understand what it's like to be on the caregiver side. And so a couple of things that I want to share is if they can email me, or they can contact, email me is the best way. But I'm going to do a 20% off of my book. So you can buy it through there, but it's going to go through my publisher that way, or you can email me. So we can mail it out with 20% off plus shipping. And then and it's also obviously available on Amazon. And so I know that I went through the challenges that I went through so that I can offer support to a larger scale. And I knew that I was not going to suffer alone. And I knew that I had to transition out of suffering into wisdom. And I'm also going to offer, you can see that I'm a regression therapist, and I just so hungry for the deeper messages. And so I'm also offering a 20% off on regressions if you contact me through email and let me know that you watch this GoldFish Report. And then also
you go to Amazon, right? It's available on Amazon.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So that's, I just want to thank you because you are so good at delivering the details of that message. Very, very, very good. And so I think it was really very helpful. And I think it's very timely. It's always timely. It's always like someone, like a higher power always involved in organizing these interviews, because it's always so very timely. So I really hope that people can find this video when they need to, and I believe that they will. I think that if you're led to and guided to the message, you'll find it. And the people who need it the most will find it. And Vicki, you've walked the walk. It's not like you're sitting here and you're just kind of preaching from your pedestal or soapbox. I mean, you've walked the walk. And it was a difficult walk, and I admire you for the courage and strength. You are a true steel magnolia, my friend, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the GoldFish Report. I love to feature our steel magnolias. There's so much for women to have to overcome and to deal with in this life on this planet. And I'm glad to see some things are changing slowly, but sadly, it's a little too slow. There needs to be definitely a little bit more of a balance for women on the planet. It's very difficult. And of course, we can see by Sarah Sanders resigning. I mean, she's got little children. It was too difficult of a balance. I mean, I'm not speaking for her. I'm not saying, why she resigned. She did say, her most important job is being a mom. She has little school-age children, and they need her more than we do right now. And she needed to resign. It goes to show you. I mean, it's a difficult balance for mothers who want to work and want to have a career. Like you said, being a stay-at-home mom, you just didn't feel like you didn't feel valued in the way that other people do when they're building a career. It's not just earning a living, it's about building a career, and it's about having that under your belt and having that experience, because you lose out on that when you are home raising your children. You do lose out on that, and I have as well. I think it's difficult to like I said, you measure productivity in a very different way. You know what I mean?
When you're scrubbing baseboards and doing laundry. And the deeper level of that is the soul experience, that it's one more time that we are reminded we're creators. And yes, having children is one of the greatest gifts we could ever have, and it's the biggest challenge and the greatest reward. But that reward is really hard to see a lot. And so as a creator, when you go out into the outside world and you contribute in some way, there is something more that we receive than what we give, because you're contributing to the whole.
Look, being a caregiver is extremely demanding, you know, even if you, and I love my children so very, very much, but it's there has to be a balance. You need to refill your own cup of love too, and of energy, because if you're just giving out and it's always, you know, there's always this output all the time, you need to be recharged. I mean, you need to have your time off, you need to have your little break, and when you don't get that, you just completely wear yourself out, and that's really unhealthy. And
Yeah,
that was a
I
point I
agree.
got to. Yeah, and it was too much. Yeah.
As far as the caregiver information, uh, it's not, you know, this, I have no intention of tooting my own horn with this. It's just that I saw where the lack was when I went through that experience. And, you know, when people see someone that you know that's struggling, it's really an insult to say that we have a singular reason to why someone's ill. And sometimes people don't live. They're not, you know, sometimes their journey takes them out of this life, and sometimes they contracted for that experience. And maybe the healing wasn't necessarily for the physical experience, it was more for the soul. And we have to allow that process. But there's a lot of fear that resides in a lot of homes that are, you know, my neighbor across the street almost lost his wife the other night. And, you know, he's watched how I almost lost Scott a few times. And, you know, we keep each other in prayer, and we keep having this awareness. But being a caregiver, we underestimate on what there is. Nobody went to school and was said, well, this is what you're going to endure when you're a caregiver. Nobody learned how to do that. So we're winging it. We're constantly in this winging it stage. But I want to say that whoever is suffering, meet them where they're at. Don't try to fix them. Offer support if they're willing to have new information. Please don't ever insult someone and say this is your answer and this is why you're sick. If you would have thought differently, or if you would have behaved differently, or if you would have done differently, because that's just adding insult to injury. And then recognize whatever their needs are, try to meet them for the level that you're capable of. Now, when I was really sick, I had really young children, and you know, it really hurt that nobody knocked on my door and said, can I feed your children? Can I please just help in some way? And, you know, whatever is their passion or whatever is in their life, show up. And it doesn't mean every day, occasionally, once would be nice. But, you know, if they're, I expressed, like, if they're a gardener, go weed their garden. If that's where their passion is, or, you know, if their passion is their animals, then offer to walk their pets. Something that can just lift the burden and help them know that they're part of a tribe that's bigger than them, and give them a sense of community and love and support. And then leave judgment at the door, because you don't know the path that they're walking, but maybe they're there to teach you too. Maybe they're there to teach you compassion and service, and they're giving you an opportunity. So there's a lot of information in that book that I'm very proud of, and that's one of the things that just caregivers, we need to wake up to recognize that, you know, one, we did not come to this planet to be so service oriented that our life purpose was to meet the needs, you know, the physical needs of somebody else. It's bigger than that.
Right.
But we also know that we have an opportunity to step up when other people are in need.
Yeah, caregivers definitely need to have a break from caregiving. Yep. And it is very demanding. Like you said, we're not here to, you know, although, you know, some may argue with that, but we are not here, you know, to provide indentured servitude,
no.
You know, at all. And, you know, our souls won't grow without that. But, you know, wonderful stuff, wonderful messages. And again, you know, like why I had you on the first time, this amazing strength that you have is really, I think, one of your greatest assets, because you really have this way of articulating and communicating. And by the way, I did have a past life regression with Vicki. It was amazing. And I think anyone who's interested in doing that should go to her website and check it out and see about that, because you're so patient and you're so very good at it, because you know exactly what to expect and how to guide people through that. And that's important. I thought it was a very interesting experience. I definitely think so. And I just wanted everyone to know that. There's so much you talked about today, and I just want to thank you so much. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave with our viewers before we
my final thought is choose to have compassion and love for yourself and for others. Activate your level of choice. If you don't know what to choose, just make a choice somewhere in your life. And I think that it's also healthy that we play more instead of being in this work mode and this accomplishment mode, that when we're out of balance, we're out of harmony with ourselves and with our environment, that we can put the stop on the urgency and know that, you know, that's why we came to live a long life so that we can have a lot of experiences. And it really is about the journey, and spend more time in that space.
Yeah, a little bit, you know, like you said, a little bit of playtime, you know. I mean, I have Nerf guns. We go out to the park and play
Yeah.
Nerf battles, and you got to stay a kid at heart. I think that will help. And, you know, everyone knows I have lightsabers. I've put them on. I've showed them on a few different, you know,
Yeah.
interviews, because there's some that are really cool, actually. And, you know, if you really like the Star Wars movies, you have to have one while you're sitting there watching them.
Well, who doesn't like Star
least
Wars? I mean, come on.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, you know, it's cool when you can, you know. So anyway, I think it's important that we all kind of keep that. That's a really good advice. It's good to be reminded of. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I hope our viewers like this. Please feel free to make, you know, comments in the comment section if they're nice. And if you don't, you know, have nice comments, we don't want you there anyway. So, but anyway, now we just have some trolls that come on no matter what I talk about. We get people who, but we have the most loving, wonderful people.
Yeah.
Viewers all over the world, actually. Our friends in Ireland, our friends over in Scotland and the UK. We have friends over in Australia who watch. We just are so grateful for all of you.
Great.
All of our friends down under and in South America, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and all of our Patreons. And if you want to be a Patreon and help support the GoldFish Report, the links are in the description section. We're also on Instagram, although it's still kind of new, but we're there. All the links are on the website at thegoldfishreport.com, folks. So stay tuned. We're going to be bringing more of these reports to you, more interesting interviews. It's not all politics. I would never do that to all of you or myself. So, but that's sadly, you know, what we do have to include that in a large portion of what we do. But thank you, Vicki, so much. It's been a pleasure. You're always welcome. You're a friend of the GoldFish Report, and you know you're always welcome back on with your amazing strength and wonderful messages of support and encouragement for all of us, which we all need. We all need this. And for those that just don't have the friend that knows the right words to tell you, this friend is here for you today. So she's bringing those words to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
For all of us. So, and with that, folks, have a great week. We'll be back Monday with another POTUS report. And just have a wonderful week and be good to yourself. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.